Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm going to tell you a story from the early days of starting my organization called unCommon Construction. So if you're not familiar with who we are, unCommon Construction is a nonprofit here in New Orleans that hosts an apprenticeship program for high school students. So we take kids from different schools around the city, they're paid, and they get school credit for building a house or another project together. And then we sell that house and match their paychecks with a scholarship. About 10 or so years ago, I had a miracle on Bourbon Street, and it led us to realize our potential as a values-based organization. I found a lot of value on Bourbon Street, which is an unlikely place, and it's been a theme in my story to the point where I am today. Over the years, finding myself in seemingly the wrong place at the wrong time has led to a lot of the right opportunities. So I'll share a little bit with you about that, but I won't bury the lead. So one day on a Sunday afternoon, I went down to Bourbon Street with a couple of friends in town from out of town because I had lost a bet to sing karaoke. And there, I met someone who donated $300,000 to my nonprofit in our first year of operating. And since then, we've been able to take all the next steps to develop our programming and organization into one that's having a national impact across state lines and is changing a conversation around education, workforce development, and the value that youth can contribute to our communities. But we didn't start there. We started, I guess you could say, about 20 or so years ago. When I was in high school, I grew up in San Diego, California. My dad's a doctor, my mom's a teacher, my brother's a journalist. Everybody except me has postgraduate degrees. So when it was time for me to go to college or to graduate from high school, it was never a question of whether or not I would go to college, just where. So I went to the public university that was furthest away from my parents' front door at UC Davis, and then found myself in the middle of my third year amidst an existential crisis, bound to graduate early with no idea why I was there or what I was doing. So I dropped out. That was January 2005. Again, seemed to be the right place, but it wasn't right for me. Came back to San Diego, pursued some hobbies, rediscovered myself. Later that year, when Hurricane Katrina hit, I called the Red Cross to make a $25 donation. It occurred to me that I had some skills and experience that could transfer, so I asked the operator how I could do what she was doing. She signed me up for a volunteer shift, and I became a Red Cross volunteer after Katrina. They sent me here for a few field deployments, and that was the start of my relationship with New Orleans. Conventional wisdom said I should have been in college, I should have been about to graduate, I should have been doing a lot of things, but found myself in what others maybe perceived as the wrong place at the wrong time, but doing a lot of the right things. Or so it felt at the time, right? Through the Red Cross, I learned about AmeriCorps. I fell backwards into construction as the least skilled worker at a day labor company in the Reno, Tahoe area. When the Red Cross was done with me, I found myself living in a hotel behind a strip club in downtown Reno, Nevada. Wrong place, wrong time, right experience. I thought UC Davis was the furthest from my parents' house, but it turned out that A-Spear Workforce in Reno was. I learned how to work alongside people who were different from me, how to assimilate in a community that was very different from the one that I grew up in, working shoulder to shoulder across lines of difference. When I showed up in Reno, I didn't have my own steel-toed boots, so I had to rent them from the company. By the time I had left Reno about 6 or 7 months later, I had saved about $15,000 tucked in those boots and ready to go on to the next adventure. The wrong place at the wrong time became very much the right thing. Then I joined AmeriCorps, as I mentioned, came back to New Orleans in the Gulf South, working with organizations like Habitat for Humanity. I lived in a middle school that was converted to volunteer housing for about 2 years. As a kid from North County, San Diego, in an upper middle class community. Wrong place, wrong time, but a lot of the right things. Working for Habitat, I realized I had a knack for teaching people. So I wandered back over to Tulane to see about how I could use my education award. When you do AmeriCorps, you get a scholarship. To see how I could use my education award. And that conversation became, well, here's what it would look like to finish your degree here. And they offered to pay for most of the rest of it. When I called my parents to say, hey, guess what? I'm going to go back to school, get my degree. They said, well, why are you doing that? What was previously thought to be the right thing at that time was now maybe the wrong thing. While I was at Tulane, I signed up for Teach for America, became a classroom teacher, taught middle school reading and social studies in Colorado. But the traditional classroom never really worked for me, and the one that I was trying to force feed on my students wasn't working for either of us. So when I was having a good summer job experience in the hills of Chiang Mai, Thailand, which is a whole other talk, I was sharing stories with someone, and they said, well, what are you going to do with all that experience? I said, I don't know. I guess if I'm supposed to do anything, I'd build houses with high school students and use the profits to pay for scholarships for the kids who build those houses. Here I'd spent 3 years trying to convert that past experience into a sustainable career as a teacher. Wrong thing for me at the time. And it sort of struck me that I had accrued a lot of these experiences by following opportunities and trying to do what was right with what I had to contribute. So Labor Day weekend, 2014, I put all my tools in my truck and drove back to New Orleans with an idea and a hunch. Started pursuing whether or not something like uncommon construction, which sort of had a name at the time, was a thing that could exist or needed to exist or should exist. If it all went belly up, I'd become a teacher, I'd flip houses or whatever. So, I had blinders on, and this first year was like, those of you in the audience who are founders know that you are singularly focused on whether or not this thing is going to become a reality and whether or not it'll be the thing you do for the rest of your life. So then I had some friends in town visiting, and I lost a bet to sing karaoke because they were like, man, Aaron, loosen up, dude. So they challenged me to something. I can't even remember what the bet was. And we went down to Bourbon Street on a Sunday afternoon to Cat's Meow, where I happened to know the bartender, the bar next door, from the time when we were Red Cross volunteers together. Went over to the bar because there was a long line at Cat's Meow and I needed some liquid courage. Bartender said, hey, I'm talking to these people. Can you tell them a little bit about Katrina? I'm like, dude, come on. I don't want to, it's Sunday afternoon, Bourbon Street. I got to get these guys to the airport. He's like, no, come on, just talk to him a little bit. So I go over. He's like, oh, so you know him? Met this dude who you see in the middle of the picture here. Like I'm going to take that guy seriously in a dive bar on Bourbon Street, right? He says, so what do you do? I said, I'm trying to start this nonprofit. Wasn't really interested in entertaining. I had things to do and Springsteen to sing, right? He said, oh, you're starting a nonprofit. Well, what does it do? Told him exactly what I told you. He said, wow, that sounds incredible. Pulls his wife over. He says, tell her what you just told me. So I told them. He said, well, what do you need? And I'd had just enough. And he said, well, what do you need? And I said, money. And he said, well, how much? I said, I don't know, dude, a lot? And he said, well, how much is a lot? I was like, I don't know, man. And in my head, when I worked at Habitat, we'd put your name on a house for $50,000. I said, I don't know, man, 50 grand? So if you know anybody who's got that, that'd be nice. He said, well, we do. We'll do one. I said, oh, all right, well, and people BS you a lot when you're a founder. And they promise you things that they can't deliver on, and they want to it's because they want to come through for you. So I said, all right, you got a card, So he gave me a card for the winery that he owns in Napa. So I sent him an email. I said, okay. I'd Googled him since then. I was like, all right, maybe he's actually, whatever. So I sent him an email. He wrote me back. We got on the phone. Talked about a couple of ways where he could channel his support and interest. That brought it up to $60,000. He said, all right, I'm going to be down there for work. Let's get together. Obviously, I want to be on your board. We'll talk about it. I was like, ooh, man, are we the kind of nonprofit that sells board seats? So it was a gut check. We had to check it against our values. And if we were starting something, is it something that we and everyone else could believe in? So I had to go back to him and say, you know what? I'm sorry, I can't offer you a board seat. You're not from New Orleans, education, housing. It's really sensitive. We can't really, we're just, not doing that. Turns out he liked that. So the way that I was kind of blowing him off in the bar, he liked it even more. Came back down. We went to a bar down the street from here, had a beer with him and a couple of our founding board members. He said, listen, I know we're talking about $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 or whatever, but what's the real number? What do you need? What's going to send this thing into orbit? And someone who wasn't me had the confidence to say $300,000, and here's why. We told him what we would do with it. He said, well, gee, I know I could help you raise it, or I could just give it to you. And if I give it to you, then you don't really have to worry about where you're going to get it from. You can just do the thing that you're planning to do. He said, all right, I'll do the whole thing then. A couple months later, he wired us $300,000. I didn't believe it until our banker called me to tell us the money was there. What it taught me, and the lesson that we've carried along the way, is how sticking to your values and the things that you believe in, even in the least serious of moments that you find yourself in, the most unlikely scenarios, can serve as a guide for what you go on to do and the impact that you can have. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.